What a game. The Pacers come back from down 31, take the lead against the Nuggets, and then still lose to the brilliance of Nikola Jokic at home. Goga Bitadze played a great game. We're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about the game, how the Pacers came back from 31, all on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers, as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News, and today we are talking about a wild Pacers game against the Denver Nuggets. Nuggets ultimately end up winning the game, but the Pacers, down 31 very early in the game, come all the way back, take the lead, battle hard with the MVP, had a chance at it, end up losing close late in the game. So much interesting stuff happened. Ton of guys had good games. The Pacers showed how they can be at their best. They also showed somewhere where they're still at their worst. We'll talk about all that today. We'll talk about the makings of a 31-point comeback happening in like 20 minutes of game action. It was really an unbelievable stretch from the Pacers. And Goga Bitadze had an interesting game in this one. Ended up playing very well, and I want to talk about him because his splits since the All-Star break have been very good, and I want to talk about how he is growing with the new look Pacers. We got to start with the game action, though. It was bananas and so weird before we dive into the comeback specifically. Pacers fall to Denver, 125-118, and it was a weird game to describe just looking at who played well and who didn't and going through what happened, because it was really like a segmented game, right? Obviously, when there's a comeback, that's going to be the case, but it's 50-19 after about 14 minutes. And at that stage, all my notes just say like, no one can defend Jokic. Goga's having a terrible start. Dwayne Washington can't do much when he checks in. Like, everything early was coming up Nuggets. They hit a bunch of threes in the first quarter. The Pacers defense looked awful. Their offense looked out of whack. The lineup change they made, Terry Taylor started. None of it was working. It all looked terrible. And then after it was 50-19, from that point on until about the midpoint of the third quarter, when the Pacers got the lead back at 86-85, everything did work. Kiefer Sykes checks in, breaks up the rotation. They bring in Kiefer Sykes. His defense was great. His offense was great. He did a fantastic job keeping the bench afloat. Lance Stevenson made some plays. Jalen Smith was taking and hitting some threes. Everybody was hitting the role. Goga found his groove defensively. Halliburton was running in the open floor. Buddy Hield hit 5 threes. Everybody started to do their job, and they came back. And that stretch coincided against the Nuggets' second unit. That was terrible. And then also against Jokic at the start of the third quarter. And then right after the Pacers took the lead, Lance Stevenson and Austin Rivers got into a little tussle in front of the Pacers bench, double technical on both guys. And then there was another tech on Austin Rivers. He got ejected. Probably the worst tech I've ever seen. In live action, it looked like Rivers elbowed Lance in the face. He did not. But from that on, it was a pretty even game. The Pacers had they were up one with the ball probably 5 times, and they had a three that would have blown the roof off the building. And in a game like that where you come back from down 31, momentum is so important. And they missed all those threes. Justin Anderson missed a couple of them. Buddy Hield missed one that I can remember. Jalen Smith missed one that would have completely broken the game open. So there was Nikola Jokic checks in the fourth after all this weirdness where the Nuggets dominate the start and then the Pacers dominate the middle, and now it's tied. It's 100-100 when Jokic checks in the fourth quarter with about 8 minutes to go. From that point on, the Nuggets offense was just absolutely brilliant, and that's just who Jokic is. This isn't a new thing to hear him take over the game. But with 8:08 to go in the fourth, it was 100-100, and the final was 125-118, right? So in 8 minutes, the Nuggets scored 25 points. Like, Jokic just came in and cut everybody up. The second Nuggets basket after he checked in, he hit Bones Highland, and then he hit a 10-footer, and then he got fouled and hit the free throw, and then he got fouled again and hit more three throws, and then he assisted Bones Highland again, and then he scored again. He scored or assisted on every point they scored for about a 6-minute stretch until the 159 mark. So he had his handprints all over this game. So when you really look at this game, like if you looked at Goga Bitadze's stats, he's a plus 10. He had a double-double, 17 and 10. You'd think he played great. And at the start of the game, he was terrible. I had 2 straight line items about how rough he was. And then he was awesome in the second, third, and fourth quarters. Tyrese Halliburton, same story. He finished with 15 and 12, assists, double-double. Only took 1 3 and was still being aggressive. He had a really great game, but he was awful at the beginning of the game. Terry Taylor was good at the beginning of the game and then was rougher at the end. He had 18 and 9. The stats don't really tell the story for any player because the game kind of went in waves. But a lot of Pacers played well and filled their role. They had 7 guys at double figures. And like for much of the season, even the new look Pacers, balance is the name of the game. They don't have anyone so studly, so beast that they can just feed them the ball all the time. Jokic made 15 shots, took 19, right? Only 2 other Nuggets took more than 10. That is the Nuggets' balance because they have a star that they should feed the ball all the time. The Pacers, Halliburton could be that guy one day. They do not have a guy in that range. They had 5 guys in this game, take between 13 and 15 shots. That's when the Pacers are at their best. And that made them have this sort of game where they were able to play the way they should. They were able to get rid of a terrible start to this game from everybody for over a quarter and cut it out and say, hey, if we play as a team, if we play as a unit, if we defend better, we can be good. And they showed that in this game. So it was a really fascinating game, not only because there was so many ups and downs from a Pacers perspective, but just because it didn't feel like one game. It felt like a bunch of games. It felt like a first 12 minutes and then the next 30 or so, well, really a first 15 minutes and then the next 20 minutes and then a final 12 minutes. It was so bizarre. There were chants for MVP for Nikola Jokic. People were chanting Goga in the third quarter at points when he was doing an excellent job. The ejection for Austin Rivers and Lance doing that, all that crazy stuff. I mean, it just was crazy. And the Pacers deserve a lot of credit for coming back from down 31 points. But you can't make that the story to me because they had to come back from down 31 and then they couldn't dagger it up enough to where it mattered, right? If you're not down 50 to 19 at the beginning of this game, if the Pacers start terrible and it's 50-30 after 12 minutes, they win this game by like 7 points, right? That's how badly they started this game. And even in the fourth, when Jokic came in and tore them up, their defense was weak. Bones Highland was turning them up and he was turning them up. So they had a great 25-minute stretch, but it doesn't matter. They lost the game, and they had, for the Pacers who were trying to develop winning habits, they certainly did not show many winning habits in the first 15 minutes of the game. And I would say, they've been awful defensively for about 2 weeks now. Really all season they've been awful defensively, but they've been like awful worse than league level defensively for about 2 weeks now. And I would say for the first 15 minutes of this game, that was the worst defense they've played in all of March. The month is now, they don't play again this month, so that they claimed the crown. That was the worst defense they've played all month. And then, for somehow, I don't know exactly what changed in them or what inspired this run. They played the best defense they've played in a long time. They were getting in people's faces and forcing turnovers and getting out in transition and getting all the rebounds that Tyrese Halliburton said they were lacking. Terry Taylor was big on that. Goga had the double-double with rebounds. Like, everything that they have been lacking defensively for weeks and weeks, they showed it for 2 quarters. And they made a 31-point comeback go away in like a quarter and a half. It was unbelievable how fast it all happened. But they did all the stuff that they always say that they're lacking on defense for just a flash in the pan amount of time, and it looked great. And then there was a little more half-court defense in the fourth quarter, and Jokic just tore them up again. So the Pacers did a lot of stuff that they said they've always wanted to do and do better at, and they also did a lot of stuff that they have bad habits for that they need to be cleaning up going into the season. So this is a good tape game for learning to me because they kind of showed both sides of the coin. You can use one game's footage with the same opponents even, where you can say, hey, guy who made a mistake on the Pacers, wherever you may be. Here's when you did this right, and here's when you did it wrong in the same game. And that's why we were down early and why we were able to come back. Or, hey, here's how, as a team concept, we can defend this better. And here's how we did it later in the game, and it worked. So this is a good learning game to me, even though the Pacers lost. And quite frankly, this was a decent, good case scenario kind of game for them because they got to show a lot of the good stuff that they've been working on. They grew. They found at least some sort of winning habits on the defensive end. They came back from 31, and it was awesome. They still lost, but everybody was in a pretty good mood. In the post-game stuff, whereas all the Nuggets side, it was the opposite case. But they ended up losing, which is good for the tank. And the Kings won. They got to 28 wins. So unless the Pacers win 3 out of 5, they're at least top 6 in the lottery. Portland is down 5 as I speak with 5 minutes to go. Perhaps, though, the Pacers could basically clinch 5 thanks to a game like this. So they did lose, and their closing game situations continues to be a problem. But they showed this game a lot of the stuff that they've been working on defense, and I'll talk about that in the comeback segment coming up. And they showed in this game how they're able to take it on the chin and come back. And they also showed some of their warts still. Terrible starts, some terrible defensive habits where there was not a single action the Nuggets ran that the Pacers could stop. And they showed that they're still a young and growing team. So lots to work on for this Pacers team. They got 5 more games to figure it out. But this was, I think, the most encouraging performance they've had in a while. They're on a long losing streak right now. I think that was their 6th loss in a row. I honestly don't really keep track of their record too much at this stage of the season. That was their 5th loss in a row after their 2-game win streak against Houston and Portland. I don't really keep track of results anymore, but in terms of how they played and encouraging things we learned during the game, I would say that was the best game the Pacers have played, and basically since they smoked Portland by 30. But even including that, since that Portland team is awful, I would say that's the best game they played and best they've looked since probably Boston at the end of February, maybe San Antonio. In San Antonio, they looked okay that night. But this was one of the more encouraging performances from them despite the loss. So how did they come back from down 31? Had they held on to win, it would have been the the 5th biggest comeback in NBA history. NBA history. That was the kind of night we were looking at. Let's talk about the makings of that comeback and what the Pacers players and Rick Carlisle said about how the Pacers were able to turn it around. Before we do that, though, I want to talk to you guys about a new partner we've got here at Locked On Pacers, and that is NBA Top Shot, the official licensed NFT of the NBA, where you can connect with a passionate community of NBA fans across the globe and build your collection with your favorite moments from NBA history. NBA Top Shot is the future of what being an NBA fan looks like. Part trading cards, part stock market, and part fantasy sports with a built-in loyalty program. They have evolved trading cards and made it easier to buy, sell, and trade by removing the hassle of card grading shoeboxes and binders. Instead, they have a 24/7 peer-to-peer marketplace. You can scroll through all of your favorite players and teams to get moments, and moments are little highlights from games that you can see and watch at any time. And I always hear people say, like, why would I buy something I could watch on YouTube for free? And that's not what it is. It's not about watching the highlight. It's about the ownership, the stock market part of the NBA's greatest moments. And owning those moments can get you access to unbuyable once-in-a-lifetime experiences. Last year, Top Shot flew out a bunch of people to Phoenix for Game 5 of the NBA Finals. The following week, they flew some people to New York for some dinner with Obi Toppin of the New York Knicks. If you sign up for Top Shot today, the best way you can get going is getting a starter pack for just $9. You could pull a moment of a superstar, one of your favorite rookies. So head over to lockedon.nbatopshot.com to start building your collection today. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Now. Hear about the latest going on around the NBA from all the local experts here on the Locked On Podcast Network, including yours truly as we talk about Nuggets Pacers. I'll be on there for my segment for that game. Let's talk about a 31-point comeback. Look, that does not happen. And they lost the game, so it will be completely lost in history. This might be a game that, I was there, and I'll probably never forget this game because had they won, it would have been definitely the craziest Pacers game I attended. But even in the moment, I just couldn't believe what was happening the entire time. And it was up there in memorability. That's not a word. And how memorable it was for me with the Bojan Bogdanovic playoff game from the 2018 playoffs against the Cavs. Because, look, like I said in the last segment, a 30-plus point comeback has only happened 7 times in NBA history, 31-plus only 5 times. And that is what the Pacers were staring in the face in the third when they took an 86-85 lead after Tyrese Haliburton whipped in the weirdest pass to Jalen Smith. It was a wide open pass on a fast break, and he swirled and spun and flung it to him at warp speed, and the crowd was really into it. And in that moment, I thought the Pacers were going to win for sure. They had all the momentum. I mean, coming back from 31 down is unbelievable. The Nuggets looked totally detached from the game. Basically, only Jokic and Bones Highland were trying for Denver. Now, that's 2 great players to have trying for your basketball team. But in that moment, I thought the Pacers were going to win. And they came back from 31 down. They did not win. And it's not like it. I'm not stunned they lost. That Nikola Jokic was the MVP and tore him up. But when you come back from down 31, and they did it from basically about the 9-minute mark in the second quarter to late in the third. It was the third quarter when they got the lead back. So it was about a 25-minute stretch of basketball. Not even. Less than that. Probably like 20-minute stretch of basketball where they outscored Denver by 32 points. That is insane. Denver's really good. They're 5th in the West. How do the Pacers catch that lightning in a bottle? What leads to a 31-point comeback? How do you evaluate that going forward if you're the team? Well, look, the biggest thing that leads to a big comeback is you have to have the deficit, right? 50-19 was the score at one point in this basketball game. And it only took about 14 minutes to get there. Embarrassing start for the Pacers. And that sets up a big comeback. So when you start that badly, and we'll get into the positive parts of this because a 31-point comeback is a positive. But look, the Pacers net rating in first quarter since the All-Star break now, right? From mid-February to March 30th, after 17 games, the Pacers have a negative 25.1 net rating in first quarters. That's a weird sample size thing, but they've been awful in first quarters. That is last in the league. Dead last in the league. Only 3 teams with less than negative 17 net rating in the first quarter. Just completely awful. Their defensive rating in first quarter is 133.3. That is unbelievably bad. Only a couple teams are over 120. They're over 130. Their offense is okay. It's not like good or anything. It's above some other teams, but Their defense and net rating are worse in the NBA. They are so bad at starting games on defense, and they clean it up sometimes, but it's the biggest thing contributing to these losses. And in this case, it was the biggest thing contributing to a 31-point comeback. So what did they change? What went well for the Pacers? And I liked the way Rick Carlisle described this. The exact quote he used, what he said was, I'll get to the exact quote part, but what he said kind of was, we did some stuff in the second and third quarters that I think we can build off of, that we finally kind of, showed what we can be. So I kind of had him follow up on that, and he said the Pacers were agitators instead of reactors. And I love that way of describing it, because I've always thought in the NBA, the team that is reacting to what the other team is doing is going to lose, right? They are already on the back foot. They have to make split-second decisions instead of doing what they think is natural or doing what they've practiced, whereas the agitator, the aggressor, the initiator, whatever you want to call it, has the advantage by default. They are the one doing the thing that they want to do, not reacting to what someone else wants to do. Reacting is not bad. It's part of playing defense. It's part of reading a set and what other people are doing, but you want to be the agitator. And the Pacers certainly were during their 31-point comeback. And a big part of that, as Carlisle pointed out, and as Tyrese Haliburton noted, was defending without fouling. Because as we've seen with this Pacers team, and as Tyrese Haliburton tried to tell us after the game, is they are really good in the open floor. They have great shooters who can fill the spots. They've got some dunkers who can go to the basket. They've got a lot of speed on this roster. Oh, and they have Tyrese Haliburton, who is brilliant in the open floor because he can shoot, because he can find guys. Lance Stephenson's been brilliant in the open floor. Kiefer Sykes, low-key pretty good on fast breaks despite his smaller stature. So they've got good guys to handle the ball in space, and that makes them really dangerous when they can get those stops and be the agitator on defense who's not fouling. That was, to me, the biggest part of this run, is they defended extremely well, and they did not foul very much at all. Pacers finished this game with 21 fouls, which seems like a lot. But a lot of that was in the first quarter when the Nuggets were running up the scoreboard. A lot of those were not shooting fouls. The Nuggets only took 14 free throws. And then a couple of those came at the end of the game. So, yes, they had a lot of fouls, but not the killer shooting fouls. They only gave up 48 points in the second and third quarters. They were defending really well without sending the Nuggets to the line, without disrupting the game, without giving them, the Denver team, easy opportunities. That was the biggest thing to me, is for a team that's been so bad on defense and continued to be in the fourth quarter for such a long time. They had a brilliant stretch where they could actually stop Denver. They were grabbing rebounds. They were not turning it over and giving Denver easy offense. They were closing out to shooters. And Denver doesn't have the best rim attackers on their team, but they did a good job keeping the ball in front of them every so often. And for a team that plays through Jokic, that's a little easier on the Pacers, who have terrible point of attack defense. So a lot of stuff kind of matchup-wise went right to allow them to settle in a little bit, but they defended extremely well without fouling. And that was a huge part of it. Another part of this, subbing in Kiefer Sykes. This is the second straight game after defending Trae Young where Kiefer Sykes has had a monumental impact on both ends. Kiefer Sykes' defense was fantastic in this game. He was all over Denver ball handlers. He only finished with one steal, but he made their life hell and made life hard for them. And you see Monte Morris having a little bit of an off night, although his stats ended up being very good. And Will Barton ends up with 2 turnovers. And, just in general, guys who had the ball a lot. Austin Rivers had an off night for Denver. Guys who had the ball a lot for them weren't particularly comfortable at any time. Jokic had 7 turnovers, obviously, with guys all over him. But Kiefer Sykes did a good job on the defensive end of disrupting, forcing the Nuggets to move it around, forcing them to change their play style a little bit. And on offense, his, again, second straight solid game, 4 for 6 from the field. He deserved the 15 minutes that he got. He had 10 points. He had 2 assists. Subbing him in, I wasn't sure he was going to play because Dwayne Washington returned in this game and came in before him. I wasn't sure if he was going to play, but he came in and he was a big part of that. And then Haliburton started pushing the ball. He has some games where he is passive. I think that's well known and probably the biggest criticism of him so far. But as they were defending without fouling and getting on transition, where Haliburton started to look ahead with his passing in a little bit different of a way, where the ball's always faster than a player and he's good at handling it, but he was always looking ahead to throw the ball ahead and really make the game speed up. He did an excellent job in that way, I thought, and that was a big push for them in the second quarter, which the second quarter wasn't amazing. The Pacers only won it by the 38-26 is a nice quarter, but when you're down 31, they were still down like 20 points at halftime. But Haliburton getting these pushes, that started and ignited the run that made the Pacers know they weren't out of it, and he did a very good job in transition. Goga Bitadze started to get aggressive. That was a big part of this as well. He was awful in the first quarter. That was one of the Goga's worst first quarters ever, and then he was great for the rest of the game. Defensively, he was fantastic. He ended up being a plus 10 despite starting so poorly. Ended up with 2 blocks and a steal. Did a great job on the glass. He had 6 offensive rebounds, leading to his 10 rebounds. So he got a bunch of shots up, and his shooting percentage looks bad, but he actually ends up finishing a lot of those possessions where he missed because of those offensive rebounds. Ends up with 17 points. So he got much more aggressive and in a groove in that second quarter, which for a guy that is normally slower paced, when the Pacers start playing fast, the fact that he was able to fit in and still have a positive impact was really huge to me. And he was not afraid to battle with Boogie. He struggled with Jokic, obviously. Everybody does. And I'll talk about why in the third segment a little bit with him, because I think it's a big part of his growth still. But he started playing much better. His screening was better. His finishing around the rim was better. The rebounding was there. And he was drawing some fouls. He got to the free throw line a few times. So he turned it up. So those 3 guys, the Kiefer sub, the Hallie pushing, and Goga's aggressiveness, that really changed the game, especially as the Pacers started to defend really well without fouling. And every player's kind of talked about this to an extent. Tyrese talked about it a little bit tonight, but Carlisle's talked about it. Goga is a little more half-courty. Terry Taylor talked about how the second unit was really good and how the third quarter is how this team wants to play. But all that to say, something they always talk about is playing in the open floor. That's when this young team was at their best. And they absolutely showed that in the second and third quarter. They were flying around the field, absolutely flying around the field. And that is a way that they need to figure out how to carry going forward, is how can they get in that situation more often? Because that's what guided them in this game. They didn't have a ton of actual fast break points, but because they weren't having to set up in half-court defense so often, and because they weren't walking it up the floor so much, they still had advantageous matchups, or they still had more time on the shot clock to run their sets. All just general things that make a team good. And I think that was all stuff that happened in this Pacers comeback that allowed them to almost make history before the end of the game, where the Nuggets really put their stamp on it. So a lot of credit again to it's weird that they lost by 8 or 7. I can't do math. It's weird that they lost by that much, and everybody was in pretty cheerful spirits after the game, because they were like obviously we sucked for the first 15 minutes, but we just played awesome for so long. And that 31-point comeback where a lot went right, a lot of players did the right things, and there was really no lineup issues. And Lance Stephenson's energy, by the way, I didn't put this in my notes because I talked about the technical fouls in the first segment, but that was a huge part of this as well. He was up getting in guys' faces. His defense was really good in this game. All that stuff ignited the Pacers to be able to come back and take the lead, even though they weren't ultimately able to get it done. So Goga was a game changer here, and I want to talk about him. We haven't talked about him on a segment on this show in a while, because I looked up his stats post All-Star break after another solid statistical game for him in this one, and they were very impressive. Despite having some warts and some funky fit stuff with this team, he continues to look like a good player who can help the Pacers going forward. So let's talk about Goga Bitadze, how he's been playing since the All-Star break, what it could mean for him going forward as the Pacers really look towards the future. Only 5 games left this year. Before we do that, though, I want to tell you guys about the good folks over at BetOnline.ag. After months of playing, college basketball has determined the top teams for the Final Four, and will determine this year's national champion this coming weekend. And BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting needs and sports info, from all the latest odds, contests, and player props. You name it, they've got it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of the latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering needs, including live betting and your favorite casino games, and very, very soon, my beloved baseball. Head over to that website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action over at betonline.net. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, everybody, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Go check out Locked On NBA to hear about what happened in the NBA last night, including big comebacks, big wins from certain teams. The Nuggets and Warriors had a crazy battle. A crazy battle. 2 top teams in the East, the Heat and the Celtics battle. Hear about it all on Locked On NBA tonight. One of my favorite go-to shows every single day. Goga Bitadze since the All-Star break. Let's just jump right into the stats. I don't need to beat around the bush and explain why I'm talking about Goga. I'll just tell you why I'm talking about Goga. Since the All-Star break, Mr. Bitadze, the 18th pick in the draft just 3 years ago, 12.2 points per game. He's only playing 21 minutes, right? So these are low minute stats. 12.2 points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, 2 assists, half a steal, 1.2 blocks, on 60% shooting, 46.7% three-point shooting, and 76.5% from the free throw line. Those are great numbers. Great numbers. And the three-point shooting is the obvious, finally thing for him, but Goga has been really effective since he finally figured out how to play with his new teammates. And I think in this Denver game, a lot of stuff was clicking for me watching him in a way that kind of hasn't even on his best nights. He was he was in the right spots more, I think, and he did a good job helping on defense when other guys got beat, and he hit 2 threes, and obviously the offensive rebounds made him look really effective and in position. But I just felt his impact more in this Nuggets game than I have in games where he has performed better statistically. Even that game where he was 7 for 7, I felt like I felt more from Goga in this game, and that's what inspired me to look at those stats. And those are really, really solid numbers. And I think he's playing close to the best basketball he may have ever played. And some of you know this who listen to the show every day, but something Goga has always talked about in his career is he always said he thought he played better when he knew he was going to get minutes. And that was tough because they had Turner and Sabonis, and then they had Turner, Sabonis, and Isaiah Jackson, and they had Al Jefferson and him, I believe, overlapped for a year. They've had others, Kyle O'Quinn and him overlapped for a year. Like they've had a lot of bigs that made it tough to give him quality minutes all the time. And that made it hard for him to be ready, but he kind of had to learn as a pro. Look, like he came in not mentally prepared for the NBA in some ways, and one of them was that. And he's talked about how he needed to be ready all the time. Well, now he's got a clearly defined role, and he's ready all the time. He knows how to be a pro and grow and fight through all those mental blocks. And he's playing a lot better. He's getting those consistent minutes. He's got a consistent role. He understands his teammates. He's learned what the new system is for him, and now he's really in a groove. Those are really good since All-Star break numbers. Those are, look, obviously you want more from every draft pick. You want to pick the best player ever of all time, but a backup center, a quality backup big is fine for the 18th pick. I know that sounds like bad value, but that's like normal value for post-lottery picks as a rotation level player. And I think if Goga can continue to be this guy, which it's not like he's doing anything out of this world impressive all of a sudden. Maybe the three-point shooting is a little much, but he certainly seems like he can be a rotation guy if he continues to have this level of impact going forward, because he's found a way to do it. And the way the Pacers are at their best, as Halliburton explained after this game, as has been said by many guys, is when they're playing really in transition in the open floor. And intuitively, that doesn't necessarily suit Goga very well. He's definitely one of the slower guys in the rotation right now, and he's not going to be a trail man because his shot's not at that level. Maybe he can get there. But where he does help with that is his defense, where he is a good rim protector. He understands when he needs to slide over and help, and it takes him out of rebounding position all the time, and that's something he's got to work on, certainly. But because he can be a rim deterrent, I think that helps the Pacers get in transition like it did fairly often in this Nuggets game, and that is when they're at the most dangerous. So perhaps he's not necessarily this massive, huge help on offense, but he definitely helps the Pacers get to their best positions on the defensive end, and that's where I think he can be impressive. And in this game, too, he's just got like an MF thing going on recently where he's like a little more oomphy out there. And I always use those words in a lame way, but he's got more, you can feel him kind of games recently where he's putting a stamp on it, and he doesn't back down from anything, even when he's the worst matchup. So he still has his warts, and I think we saw that in this game. And I talk about this all the time with him, and this is maybe a weird way to describe him, but he's a rule follower when he plays basketball. He thinks things should go a certain way, or at least it appears from my seat that is how he plays. He knows how things are supposed to be, and he's always making his decisions based on how those rules have been explained to him. So when he plays against a guy like Jokic, there are no rules for Jokic. Jokic is the most creative player in the league. He can see passes no one else can see. And yeah, he recognizes patterns and where guys will be, but he doesn't really care. He can look over his shoulder for a millisecond and know where everybody is on a possession. That is a matchup that's really hard for Goga because that is when he can get torn up. But against Boogie, he figured out, kind of what to do in this game and how he can put his stamp on this game, and he found a way to do that for a consistent game. So, look, the offensive rating for the Pacers with Goga on the floor since the All-Star break is insanely good, 118, unbelievably good. The defensive rating has not been very good, over 120 with him in the game since the break. So, what does that tell me? Well, if he's playing really well offensively and they can have this great offensive rating, yeah, maybe he can fit on the Pacers going forward. But if they can't defend with him at all, what's the point? And personnel is a factor on both of those situations. And maybe on the next great Pacers team, they want more speed. Maybe on the next great Pacers team, they want better defense. And then he can't fit. But I think that the fact that he's definitely been better on defense than offense his whole career. I think the fact that the offensive rating is high is more encouraging to me than the flip side where the defense should be less encouraging, especially because it doesn't matter what center's been in for the Pacers since the All-Star break. Their defense has sucked with Isaiah Jackson and even with Miles Turner in January when he was playing, and even when Jalen Smith at center, the defense has been horrible. But the offense has not always been good, and it has been good with Goga in the game. So I think he has found a niche role with this team. He figured out how to play with these new guys, and he's looked really good for about a month and a half now. And for a guy that really struggled to have an impact and find a role consistently, to have quite a few good games in a row, to find a way to be impactful on offense, and to really slide around the floor on defense in a way that actually makes him look like a deterrent, has been really impressive. And I think the Pacers have found a rotation big in Bitadze. Now, the problem they'll have going forward and the decisions they'll have to make, and I'll discuss this in length on a podcast at some point, is that the guy they want to be a rotation big for them? They have Isaiah Jackson. They have Jalen Smith. They still have Miles Turner under contract. They still have to make big men decisions. But if they can be more confident thinking they have at least a rotation level big in Goga, that makes some of those decisions even easier, or some of those risks they might have to take in a deal or something a lot easier to make. So his ballooning in impact the last month and a half has been good. The fact that he was able to, despite an awful start, I mean, he was horrible in the first quarter of this Nuggets game. Despite that, he was able to come back in and be a high impact guy for the rest of the game. They won his minutes on this night. Shows a lot about the growth that Goga's had, because he would have some games when he was younger that he would get benched and just be done. His night would be completely ruined. So he's grown a lot. He's shown that he can fit with this new team, and he's shown that he can be a rotation quality big. I think that bodes well for his future. But, as has been part of his career, he'll have to stay healthy, and he'll have to continue to have that lasting impact. These last 5 games are very big, to me at least, for him and his future with the team. And I'll continue to monitor that all here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Tomorrow, a really cool guest coming in to talk about all things Pacers with 5 things to go and a certain event that just happened to the team. It should be really cool. You can follow me on Twitter at TEastNBA and the show at Locked On Pacers. Hope everybody has a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.